Welcome back to Monetizing Innovation, the show where we unlock the strategies, mindsets, and technologies powering breakthrough growth and value creation. I'm your host, John Holcomb, and today we're joined by a results driven leader known for his ability to align strategy, operations, and execution to deliver meaningful business outcomes. With experience navigating complex environments and driving performance, David brings a pragmatic, solutions oriented approach to leadership and growth. He is recognized for building strong teams, simplifying complexity, and translating vision into measurable impact. Join us as we explore leadership, execution, and what it takes to turn strategy into results in today's fast-moving business landscape. David, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show.
Absolutely, John. Thanks for having me. I know we've talked plenty in the past and just about the breadth and impact of this podcast. So I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And David, you have a great background and I think a real learning mindset. Maybe you could go ahead and share a little bit of your perspective on your background and, yeah, what led you to this point today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Recently brought into this dynamic merchant services and fintech consulting space, leaving the energy space from more the energy efficiency side of things, where I work for a major utility player here in North Carolina, and really what kind of ties these spaces together is really their change, their dynamism, their constant nature of learning and progress. And so that's really what kind of has brought me into this space, just the curiosity of working with the variety of folks that I work with, that ability to have a very different day each day, and just going into it with that mindset that I don't know everything, and it's good to just keep learning every day from different folks. I think that's sort of the common theme here.
No, and I think that's so powerful when you think about that learning mindset and some of the things that it really takes. As you look at that, what drew you to this field of merchant services? What makes it so dynamic today?
And it's interesting to discuss in the scope of merchant services because I like to look at it more as a different, more consultative approach than your traditional merchant services. Really details sort of the payment processing side of things, but it really goes beyond that because of course these days it's not just a card swiper. We have so many different packages around it, so many different options in the market. So it's really navigating kind of what works best for merchants, for the different types of folks that you have out there, not like one size fits all approach. So I think that's sort of what drew me, is just the variety of technology there and just the ability to keep moving, keep learning about different technologies out there, available to different folks, and helping them navigate that, providing that service. Ultimately, kind of I go into it with that mentality of service because that's what works, especially in a referral driven business like the one I'm in. Folks want to feel like they have somebody they can trust helping them navigate what can be a tricky landscape in terms of all the products out there. So that's really what drew me to it, and the ability to consult, the ability to learn what folks need, going through that discovery process of, well, maybe this is what you're using now, maybe this is sort of what your workflow is as a small business. How can we optimize it? How can I help you find products that are more suited, towards your goals, for your process of expansion, or even and just kind of keeping operations as slim and efficient as possible. So it's having those conversations, and being open-minded to learn about different fields. Absolutely. That's probably what drew me the most about it.
Well, it's interesting. I think that learning mindset is so critical, right? Especially understanding the needs, especially of your customers. When you look at some of the services, right, that have been more traditional and then the changes that are ongoing today, what are some of your approaches? How do you approach helping the customers through some of these difficult decisions?
Absolutely. So really, the basic part of it is understanding what pain points they face truly, and kind of doing a deep dive. Of evaluating, especially when you come to talk to merchants that use products like from Square, the Square and Stripe, or which can be great. They're formidable technologies, but a lot of times, depending on the folks that you're running into, they might not need everything that they're provided with. So a lot of times, it's kind of looking at the whole picture and saying, well, maybe we can cut back on this service, save some money. That's sort of the approach here is not only value seeking, but it's also cost saving, because a lot of times when it comes to larger actors, they don't always have a tailor built approach. It might just be the point of sale system that kind of covers a lot of different spaces, but again, it might not be everything that they might not be using everything on it. So it's maybe finding a solution that makes more sense for that specific person, and it's having those conversations. Not only evaluating where they're at currently, uh, but also looking, maybe on the medium to long term side of things. Saying, well, where do you want to be in 6 months, in a year from now, and how can I help you get there? How can we leverage the products available here to get you that growth, to get you that more folks walking through the door. And so it's a little bit of a similar approach to the business consulting side. I think that's why I've really enjoyed our conversations,
Mhm.
because you're able to kind of provide your own insights on that. And really within that conversation, when I talk to business owners, we can at times also even bring in other experts, because that's a great time while we're looking at the technology, the hardware of things. Well, let's say that's also a good time to look at the brand. Perhaps maybe we do a rebrand. Perhaps we look into your processes. We bring somebody in like Angela Chamberlain on your past episode, who can provide a different approach. Kind of look at the AI side of things. So it's just giving that opportunity, giving that business owner the opportunity to have a step back and look at the big picture. Because at times as business owners, there's not always that opportunity, because every day is important. The calendar fills up, and you don't always have those moments for feedback and and evaluation, which is really important, because you want to know how you're feeling. You want to know kind of how your operations are working out, what makes sense now, and it's just giving that opportunity, giving that chance to them to just look. And even if it's just sort of a conversation where we sit down for an hour, we talk about their motivations in business, maybe how they got involved, learning a little bit about that. And then that sometimes just having that conversation can make folks realize, well, wow, maybe I've forgotten something. Maybe I meant to pivot in this direction, and now we can possibly do that. Approach, and just the conversation itself. I can't say I'm an expert in every field, but I can at least provide insights. And due to the nature of my work, I can network for them, and maybe as I said, if I'm not the AI expert, I can bring somebody who is.
I think you really touch on a critical point, right? Especially with some of the folks you're working with. I mean, you work with a range of businesses, and many of the founders or operators, they're expert at their field, right? But they're not an expert at point of sale systems and how do they just want to be able to have a plug and play and go, right? And I think understanding their business allows you to help them create the right solution.
Absolutely. And especially now where we have new products out constantly, it's also keeping folks, once we're working together, in the know. It could be as simple as having the conversation 6 months ago. I'll give you kind of a particular example here. I think it would be useful. So a client that I'm working with right now, Jake Berlin, he operates a great community-driven space here in the Raleigh area, and it's suited for musicians, artists. It's really a lovely third space of sorts. And with him, we've been able to kind of sit down and look at, like, maybe in a few months, once he gets that liquor license, perhaps getting him updating his technology. I know we've signed off on a point of sales kind of architecture right now that works for what he has, but then we know that maybe in 6 months we have to update things. We know that maybe in a year from now, a couple years ago, we might have to revamp the ticketing side of things, which we've kind of streamlined everything for him under one platform. So he was able to really save on costs while having everything consolidated under one place. Whereas before, he was dealing with a lot of different technologies that didn't always integrate together. So now he's saving time, he's saving money, but we also recognize that in this kind of ever changing world, you might want to move in a different direction in the future. So it's keeping our eyes open, especially as I work. If I learn everything new for every day, even for my own company, that's constantly launching new features or new partnerships with different folks. So it's sort of keeping my ears to the ground for him, and other folks that I work with, even if they're not my client, just even other referral partners. It's just having that kind of open mindedness and just listening constantly.
Yeah, I really like what you presented there too, because not only do you provide the value in terms of the depth of the technology, right, that's available from Curve, and then you also though have this collaborative approach, right, by bringing value. If even if it's not the service you provide, you can help connect them to some of the folks. Would you like to talk a little bit more about that?
Of course, yep. As I told you during that the moment where we're going over like the technology side, the hardware side, as I said, that's just a great opportunity to evaluate other things, and it can be simple as maybe let's take, if we're talking about a, retail business that works heavily through Google, it's like, say, let's do some SEO work here. I'm not the expert on that, but I might know somebody who is, and bring them in to just come and look, because what a better time than now, as we're looking, as we're going through all these other changes. And really the way I operate is, I like to kind of plan ahead, make sure that we have the time and space to have this conversation, and move at the pace that makes sense. As a salesperson, I don't like to rush. Or generally as a person, I like to move slowly. And, what's the expression? Measure twice, cut once. I'd rather not make those mistakes. So I bring that to to this approach, to this consultative approach. We want to make sure our process is logical, make sure the timetable makes sense. And during this period, bring in other folks, especially, as you said, with different other parts of different businesses, kind of having that moment. Well, and I've kind of started getting a little bit, a bit of a system going where it's like, well, let's look at maybe the photography that you have on your website. Can we revamp that? I know somebody, great photographer, I can bring them in for that. Or as you said, on the SEO side as well. If we want to look at your Google reviews, how can we leverage that and get you more visits to your site, and perhaps more, a higher revenue based off that. So it's just having that moment, and recognizing, talking with that. I feel like I've noticed, once you talk to a merchant and you really have shown them that interest in their business, because that's really the basis of it. It comes down to that interest in seeing them do well. Once they kind of tell that they can tell that you're on their side and you're really wanting to help them drive business, then they're more open to talking about other sides of it. And then that's where that kind of networking. We'll touch upon it a little bit later, I believe, but that's where that networking comes in, with the ability for me to meet a lot of different folks in different spaces, and then say, well, as I'm having my meetings with them, separately, knowing what their areas of emphasis are, and keeping that sort of in my mental Rolodex, for me to just bring them into conversations like this, and set up those meetings, and building those synergies. Ultimately, that's what we're here for, I think. And if
Uh,
you're really leveraging the merchant services name, if you're really truly kind of utilizing it, there's a way to do it that's very basic, of course, just matching folks to the technology that they need right then and there, and then walking away, then running away. But that's really not our approach. Our approach is just to stay there, stay top of mind, because as you said, things change, revenue streams change, and just carrying on those conversations, building that relationship, and continuing it.
I think you've touched on a couple things too, not just the importance of the networking, but also I think you bring a approach to community as well that you really tie into your approach. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, just a little bit about me. I live in downtown Raleigh, which it's kind of a nice area. It's quite walkable. You see some of the same folks around town. So that's a great place that I work in. I work with business owners in my immediate area, because I live here. And I want to see them thrive. Especially these days when margins are razor thin, the cost of business is surging. We have inflationary pressure. We have supply chain issues, and these are the small actors here in the community that provide for a nice environment here, for me to be able to walk to a coffee shop, for me to be able to walk to a locally owned pizza shop. That's quite nice. That's quite valuable to me. So I see that the importance of these folks in the community, and as somebody who utilizes their products and their service, I think I'm in a good position to provide insights. So to give you an example, I'm working with a massage therapist in the Cary area. Her name is Amanda Steele. She's really really well versed in her space, and with a breadth of experience, and just kind of talking with her about this whole approach, helping them get into the spaces they need to, with maybe providing the kind of hardware that they didn't have before, but also giving them exposure, and providing some feedback. So it was kind of a nice thing. That's just my policy when I work with business owners. I have to be your customer too, so I can give you that feedback that you might be lacking. So what we did with her is I got a massage from her. It was a little excuse to get a nice massage on a weekday, and set it up as a meeting. But we went through the whole process of from signing up to an appointment to the actual payment side, and I was able to give her some good feedback that she didn't have, and look at some pain points like that. So it's really kind of the approach that I'm taking it is also as a customer. You know what I mean? So I'm going to give them that feedback that as I said, can be hard to get sometimes, and being constructive about it. Really being, well, this is not this process, part of this process isn't working great, but perhaps this other part is. How can we leverage that? How can we make the experience more user friendly so we can bring more business? And that's sort of the approach that I have here with my local area. That's, I would say, if I had an area of emphasis, it's definitely my local Raleigh businesses, because I'm here. I see them every day, and I want them to thrive as my local community here.
No, I think that's so important, right? And I think by bringing a critical evaluation too as part of the service, it really helps because many of these businesses are selling an experience, right? I mean, a massage is, as an example, right? It's the massage, but it's the whole experience of the massage as well. And if you get thrown off at the beginning through payment and other things, then that can ruin the experience.
Exactly, and again, it's working with this kind of business. That is the kind of one of the benefits of working with a small business, is that they still have the flexibility to pivot, to change to. Whereas with a larger organization, implementation can be more challenging. That's kind of the beauty of working with small businesses, and also being able to see results faster a lot of times. Working on smaller timetables.
No, I think that's such a great point, right? And with small businesses, small changes can have big effects, right? Or small savings can have big effects. That
I mean, I think of a great example from one of my colleagues out in Wilmington. Her name is Thelma Karashevitz, and she works heavily with dental offices, but she also works a lot with the bar and restaurant scene. And I just remembered one example when I was sort of learning from her, sort of mentoring under her. She at that time was finishing a deal with a restaurant where they were able to save so much through their processing by just kind of making some certain changes, adjusting their rates to the point where they were able to invest and get a new bar, build a new bar on site, and that's something that the owners have wanted to do for a while. So it's really nice when folks are able to cut a little bit of cost and invest it right back in their business, maybe back into their employees. Whatever makes sense for that kind of business. So it's really nice, I think, at the end of the day, to know that you're able to kind of generate that impact, and that means that's as just somebody who I would say what I've done in my kind of prior job experience. Whereas I've worked in sort of the public health space, or may that be energy efficiency. It all ties back to, for me, to impact, and really, especially going home with that satisfaction. I'm sure you've experienced it, yourself as a consultant, knowing that, wow, I really did something positive for this person, for this business, and now they're going to be able to reap the benefits, and I was able to help that. It again comes back to impact for me.
no, I think that's such a great perspective, and I think when you can kind of keep that perspective in front of you, it really makes work that much more enjoyable. Profit's necessary, and as you get profit, you can reinvest in the community. So that's such a fantastic way to look at it.
Absolutely.
One question I have for you too, because we hear about AI coming up, all the time, and it's always in the news. But when you look at it, especially relative to your business, what are some of the trends that you see coming your direction, and how do you see that impacting some of the businesses you serve?
Absolutely. And it's funny you should mention that, because we just had a kind of a town hall for a company, and they were just rolling out a lot of different tools in the AI space. But so it's a lot of stuff out there currently. And it's really kind of knowing, kind of talking about it, having the discussions. And it's funny. I'll reference the prior episode because it's relevant in this context, the rise of agentic AI. And while I'm here, I recommend other viewers definitely check out that episode, because the insights on there by Angela were terrific and applicable to pretty much any small business if you think about it. So yeah, it is the rise of those AI agents, and how they can be leveraged in business. Of course, when you talk about a small business, at times it might be a couple of employees that wear a lot of different hats. And AI gives you the opportunity to maybe make some processes more optimal, make kind of get rid of the busy work at times. But again, it's knowing what makes sense to use. It's not going to be, a lot of folks, I feel like, kind of sit in two camps here. It's either the, oh my goodness, AI is going to take everybody's job and it's terrible, or they're like, AI is everything. AI can solve every problem. It has no flaws. And I think the reality sits somewhere in the middle at this stage. So it's being kind of receptive. It's kind of keeping those two things in mind, that while AI can do a lot of great things, it's not flawless, and you have to work with it. You have to make sure, you have to review the results. You have to check your work heavily. I use Gemini heavily in my everyday, but I know that at times it has its flaws, and it's getting used to it. It's an ongoing process. As AI changes, it's especially from the business perspective. This is a conversation I have with folks all the time. It's you're just going to learn new tools constantly. That's just the nature of things now with AI. You're going to have to stay in the know if you really want to stay competitive and be able to thrive. And generally within kind of our side of things, with the payment processing side, it's not heavily used so far. Of course, you have technology when it comes to payment processing, and maybe, for example, I know a lot of folks are rolling out AI involved in like chargeback protection or chargeback detection. So it's using that technology in those spaces. But financial services generally, they're subject to more regulation and more oversight than a lot of the other industries. So it tends to move slowly. And it's funny. I remember kind of a tiny anecdote in this regard. When it comes to payment by tap or via NFC, when you go to a store and you just tap your card or tap your phone. I remember years ago, maybe even in 2017, 2018, being in the United Kingdom or in the EU, where this was already used everywhere, and then coming back to America and being like, well, why trying to tap my phone at the store, and it's not working. And it's funny that I discovered that we actually had the technology stateside first. It was developed here, but due to regulations, it took a lot longer for it to be rolled out. So that's sort of where it's at with this field. I think different spaces can innovate a little bit faster. Others will take a little bit longer, but ultimately it's happening, across the board out
Yeah,
there.
I completely agree with you. And I think one of the things you really highlighted, which is actually one of, I think, your strengths, is that adaptability becomes so key, and especially having that learning mindset, right? That curiosity to naturally seek out.
Of course, and I think that's where I can, bring some value to the folks I work with, because of course, as a business owner, you're busy with the business, so that leaves me the opportunity to. That's okay. You're busy with the business, but let me know what kind of products you might be curious about, or what sort of verticals you might want to,
Mhm.
grow into, and I can kind of keep my ear to the ground, and we can circle back. I can we can circle back, have a periodic, monthly one-to-one, or every couple of weeks, and I can let you know what I've heard of if we're looking for a specific tool or a specific insight. So that's sort of where I'm at, and it's funny because I was talking to my boss Jason about payment processing, and how much even that's changed. I mean, John, think about it. Maybe 10 years ago, would you have thought that you could pay with a phone? Would
Yeah,
you have thought that would have been like a regular day to day thing? And myself, I would say most of my payments, 80% of my payments, maybe 9% of payments, I do them with my phone. I find it more secure, more user friendly than just taking out the card and doing that. And if you think about it, 10 years ago, I would not have imagined that we've been doing this today. So that's just like one example of how quickly things adapt. And we were swiping back there. Now we're just using our phones. Who knows what we're going to be doing in 5 years,
yeah,
maybe?
absolutely. And those transformations continue, and I think some of that pace of change continues to increase.
It really does.
Well, and I think, you touched upon it a little bit, but especially with the customers you serve, I think I like how you approach it. It's not once and done. It's building a long-term relationship so that you can keep them abreast of the changes and help them when it's appropriate.
Precisely, and that's part of the reason why in my line of work, I like to use the fintech consultant name as opposed to more merchant services, because merchant services, I think, get sort of I think that the expression is pigeonholed. It's just a little, it's very narrow. And in the prior approach, when you talk about even some of the larger actors, they sort of sign up, a merchant onto their services, and then they disappear. There's no follow up. There's no conversations. And I think that's how I've really tried to kind of change that, at least in the way I interact, because I like to have those conversations. I like to circle back later on, see how they're doing, see how the technology is working out for them, having a review process. Whereas maybe we can, if let's say there's a retail store and they're having a hard time using one of the functionalities. Perhaps now a month in, 2 months in, we catch that before it becomes, something that they don't enjoy using, and maybe then educating them, well, this is how we use it. Just making sure everything is leveraged and utilized, and if they're not getting the best out of it, then maybe we just need to pivot in a different direction. So it's sort of, you know what I mean, it's having that ongoing kind of rapport and relationship, whereas as I've told you, other folks, they just sort of sign somebody up, and that's the end of that. No, for me, that's signing somebody up to work with me. That's the beginning of it. That I view it as a little bit different. That's the beginning of it. Working together, having that partnership, as opposed to just disappearing and just, you might have like a call every here and there, something like that.
No, absolutely. David, we're having such a great conversation. I wanted to make sure, are there any key things that you would really like to make sure the audience hears today?
Absolutely. So I would say, as a small business owner, I think it's important to be aware of where your rates lay. If you're working with somebody like Square or Stripe, not to say that they're not great businesses, they are, and they provide some incredible services, but at times when, those names are just very known. So at times when you have a new business owner going into the field, they might not do as much research as they could because they've got so much on their plate. And it's a good time, really at any time, to check that your rates are compliant and reasonable, because at times, you might be overpaying. Just on that level, at least have that conversation, shop around, ask, maybe meet with some other folks, make sure that what you're paying makes sense, and educate yourself on the matter. Because, for example, nowadays a lot of businesses, just especially, your brick and mortars, your main street America, due to the cost of businesses, folks are moving into what is called dual pricing, and it's way more common now than it used to be. And dual pricing refers to the rates to process payments being offloaded to the customer, not having the merchant pay, but the customer pay. So generally, these rates are going to be, I would say, generally 3 to 5% in that range, and depending on the kind of business they run, that's generally not a huge cost. For To give you an example, if I'm talking about a bookstore here in downtown Raleigh, their average ticket price, their average sale is going to be about $30. So 3% on $30 is not a significant amount. It's not something that's going to deter business, and that's generally becoming more known. Whereas a few years ago, it wasn't quite as common. Now you do have that be more common. So at times, there's folks that may not be as competitive because they're not willing to offload that cost, or even try it. A lot of folks can even, I've had this conversation with a few merchants where I told them, why don't we try this out, and we can always put you back on the, whatever you were using before, whatever rate you were working with, but let's try it for a month, let's try it for a couple months, see how it works, see what kind of feedback you get. And really, unless you're talking about high ticket, values, like, let's say, a furniture store, legal services, that those spaces, it's not going to be a significant amount. you know so it's having those conversations, letting them know that this is not me telling you that you should be going in this direction. This is just what is currently happening, and you stand to benefit by pivoting over to this payment structure, where now you're going to be able to save on your rates completely.
Absolutely.
Yep.
No, this is fantastic, David. Such a great pleasure talking with you today, too, and really look forward to your continued success and also the collaborative approach. I really think that's so key, especially in today's business environment.
Absolutely, because we can't all pretend we're experts at everything, but the beauty of business now, and collaboration, is being able to meet folks with similar value sets. Truly, I think that's, in my opinion, if I'm going to work with somebody, you have to have similar value sets and come at it from the right angle, which is bettering other firms, helping folks reach their dreams. And I know that sounds a little cheesy, but I found that I see best more eye to eye with those kind of folks that are very optimistic, very driven, wanting to see impact. That's sort of what motivates them. And that's generally the folks I like to work with as like referral partners, but also the businesses that I target. That's sort of my ideal kind of case there.
No, I think that's so fantastic and really appreciate you sharing your insights today. And we'll look forward to having some future discussions in the near future.
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, it's about building that relationship and that rapport. And I'm also excited to see where the consulting space takes you. And I find that this is such a great medium for staying up to date. As we've discussed, really important to stay ahead of all these changes. And I think your podcast does a great service in that vein, because it kind of keeps you on your toes to, what might be moving in our direction, different trends. And I will definitely stay tuned to the next episode for sure.
Excellent. Thanks so much, David. We'll talk soon.
Perfect. Thank you so much, John.